Winter blues got you down, Dolly? Is the weather not cooperating for getting out in the garden? Here are 3 easy and fun tips for staying busy in the off season. So I am here to tell you about 3 things that you can do in the off season when the weather's bad, to be either getting ready for your garden or to just find some other joy inside with growing things. So my first tip is going to be planning. Okay, so I think even just a rudimentary way of keeping track of things and planning is really important and can be really helpful. What I do here is I square foot garden. And if you haven't tried this before, there's a great book. It's called Square Foot Gardening. It's by Mel Bartholomew, and it's got a lot of great information in it. Because I have limited space here, I'm only on about 1/6 of an acre. I do a lot of square foot gardening, and it allows me to grow a lot of things in a little amount of space. And it makes for easy planning too. What I do is I go and I find on the internet, and I will post a link to the paper that I use. I find 1-inch graph paper because it gives me enough space to write. And I treat every inch like a foot, like 1 square foot in my garden. And so then what I do is I plan out, I just take a little highlighter and I trace out my beds, okay? So, and I have a few different size beds. So I trace them out with a highlighter, and then I write in the square foot things. This was from a couple years ago. I write in there what I'm going to plant. And I will tell you that when I'm doing this initial planning, I don't put in varieties. Unless some varieties are really different from their counterparts, I don't put in varieties. I wait to write in the varieties of the plants that I plant when I'm actually planting, so I know that it's accurate. The other thing is, this is my last year's, these same beds, and this is my coming up year. So you'll notice that there are some different things. They look a little different. I rotate as much as I can. So even if you just rotate like every couple of years or 3 years or whatever, you're probably doing a pretty good job of that in a small backyard garden. Another thing to think about when you're planting is companion planting. So you want to plant things together that like each other. I plant a lot of times, tomatoes and peppers together. Some people do the 3 sisters, where it's corn and squash and beans growing together. And then one thing I've done, I've made some notes to myself about when I should be planting the seeds for these different crops. So I would make a little note to myself around the edge of my plan about which thing it is I'm going to start by seed, and how many weeks before the last frost I should plant it. And then I kind of went back into the calendar and put the dates there. I would try to stick to the suggested planting times, and usually you can see that on the back of a seed pack or by a quick Google search. So I like a 1 foot square. Now, if you have different spacing, because you're not doing square foot gardening, definitely mind the spacing, and you might use a different grid pattern, just have more empty spaces on it if you're doing a different spacing. One other thing I've also done is I've gotten smaller grid paper, and these are how I plan out my planting trays. So even my seeds, when I go to start my seeds, I'll have the trays mapped out before I start them to make sure that I don't get to planting and then plant way more than I had planned on planting. And then hang on to your plan from year to year. I keep them. I have a little folder that I keep all my planting plans in. I keep them together, and then that way it helps me from year to year with rotating or trying to remember back to the different varieties that I planted. But that would be tip number 1 for what you can do in the off season to get ready for the next season. All right, so the second thing that you can do in the off season to keep you gardening is planting and maintaining and taking care of your seeds and seedlings for the next gardening season. So first of all, what do you grow your seeds in? Well, I use these little kind of plastic plug trays. They usually come in a big sheet in another tray. And what I do over the years is I take that big sheet and I cut it up into 6-packs or other random shapes, because I'm likely 1 type of plant will be ready to pot up before the others in the whole tray. So I cut them up so it's easier to pull one out to do pot up and things like that. You can also use egg cartons. You can also do toilet paper rolls and just set them down in a tray, fill them with soil, and toilet paper rolls work really well. They hold up a little better than the egg cartons. There's also soil blocks. Okay, and soil blocks, they come in a lot of different sizes. I have the small size and kind of the medium size that these guys will transplant into these. There's a lot of YouTube videos out there about doing soil blocking. I did it last year, tried it out. For me, it doesn't work for a lot of what I grow just because a lot of what I grow early. And so I pot them up multiple times. I'm not growing a ton, and I have the time and I have the space. So if you're not growing a ton and you have the time and the space, I like growing things early and potting them up multiple times. And what I was noticing is by the time I got in this size, they were needing to be potted up again. And then I'm putting them in a pot, which defeats the purpose of the soil block. So for me, for my really small things, I will still do that. But for the most part, I'm using these trays. The last one I have to show you are these like Jiffy trays where you get the little Jiffy plug and you soak them in water and they grow and you pop them in here and then it comes with like a little humidity dome. I've used that before. I just use my own soil now, or I buy soil to use instead of doing those because it's just too cumbersome. This is more efficient for me. Soil. Actually, it's usually soil-less mixture that you're using to start your seeds. I do recommend a seed starting mix. Seed starting mixes are not going to have like a lot of nutrients in them because really they're just a medium there to get your plant going. So there's something to note there. Once your seeds start growing in a soilless, seed starting mixture, they are going to, once they get big enough, they're going to need to be transplanted into something with nutrition or fed because there is not much nutrition in a seed starting mix. I actually really highly recommend using a peat-free mix if you can. It's just for environmental reasons. I recommend using like a coconut coir-based seed starting mix. You can make your own. I usually keep coconut coir bricks here, and sometimes I'll make my own mix if I'm low on a bag. I've used the Quick Root peat-free mix from, I think it's Peaceful Valley Farms. You can buy that online if you can't find it. I've really liked that. It's worked really well for me. So I'll put a link to that down in the description as well. I'm going to just do a basic seed starting. Some perennials and different types of plants, if you want to play around with starting those from seed, some of them just pay attention if they have any stratification requirements. Like sometimes they need cold, moist stratification. So you need to put them in the fridge, like in a damp paper towel or something for a little while. But I'm not going to get into all that. So just always read instructions or Google instructions. Today I'm going to start some sweet peas and I'm going to do a little experiment with some moonflowers. So I always like to experiment with different methods for starting seeds. So I'm going to show you that, and then I will show you how once they've grown a little bit, how I transplant them up to a bigger size. Okay, so I'll get started. To note, first of all, always label. Always label your seed. And my little experiment with the moonflower, I have done one where I didn't do anything to the seeds and I just put them in. And I did a second one where I nicked the seed coat with like a little trimmer, and so it's supposed to help them germinate by getting more moisture to penetrate the seed coat because their seed coats are really hard. One thing to note too, this moonflower, this is the annual moonflower. This is the one that's like related to morning glories. It's a white flower. It's climbing, it's vining. It's not datura, which also has a common name of moonflower, which is a perennial, and it is really toxic. It's Jimson weed is another term for it, another common name for it. It's really toxic. I keep that out front, away from the dogs, away from the chickens. Not that they would necessarily eat it on their own, but if they do, it can be really toxic to animals. So moonflower, the annual vining variety, this is the one I'm growing. What I like about them is that they open at night and they smell really good. And so I like things that don't just, have blooms for the daytime pollinators. I like to have those evening and nighttime pollinators as well. So aside from labeling, another thing to note is that when you are planting your seeds, typically the bigger the seed, typically the deeper you're going to plant it. So if you have little tiny like pepper or tomato seeds, you might not plant those as deep as say a sweet pea seed, which is a little bit bigger. They usually have on the back of the packaging how deep to plant them and that kind of thing. So just make sure you pay attention to that. Another thing I should mention is I like to moisten my soil before I start planting seeds, and then give them like a mist after they're planted. And then that way, when if you're waiting till after you plant to water, especially if your soil's really dry and you go to water, it kind of moves the seeds around, and sometimes they can get like plunked out if they're really light and kind of near the surface. So I like to kind of water it beforehand so that my seeds don't get moved around as much in the process. Okay, so here we are in my guest bedroom, which I have commandeered a section of it for growing my seedlings every year. I have a setup over here that you can't see that's out of view that has a light, and then I have this 4-tiered grow shelving unit. This is where I put my babies. So this is where I put my newly planted seeds along with my little seedlings that eventually need potting up. I do have a heat mat, and I do have an LED grow light here that each one of these will be placed under. I usually like to give it a good mist, especially those like the little corner cells, because sometimes those get gypped on water. And then at least for the first little while, I will give them a humidity dome. And I monitor this because sometimes with the humidity domes, they can stay too humid and you can get some mold and things like that growing. So I kind of monitor that. If I need to, I can always prop it up a little bit and give it a little more air. And then eventually I'll take those off. I have this fan moving around the room too, that once they start growing, I like to keep a little air on them because it makes their little stems stronger. And so it also keeps the air moving so that you don't get, you can avoid some of that mold and mildew if it does get too humid. All right, y'all, let's talk lights. I see this all the time. People put their seedlings on a windowsill in front of a window, and then they get really spindly, tall, leggy sprouts, and they wonder why. And they wonder if they're gonna make it. So I would say I cut a lot of corners. Typically speaking, I take the easy way out a lot when it comes to plants. One of the things that I would not recommend skimping on is lights. When you rely on a window in the sun, there are some good windows. Don't get me wrong. Some of you have a setup probably that works really well for this, but I would say most of the time I see people have issues with their plants when they start them on a windowsill. So if you can get a grow light, there are some very inexpensive grow lights that you can buy online. But it's really important, and getting your plants actually close to the light is going to be the best thing that you can do for them. So once you have your seeds started, you have a good spot for them, let them grow and do their thing and check on them and make sure they're doing okay. And then remember, once they start growing, they're going to need a new home once they kind of grow out of their space that they have in whatever it is you've started them in. For example, I have these marigolds that I've been growing, and I can see now that some of the roots are starting to grow out of the bottoms, not majorly so, but they're also really big, filling up their cell. And I noticed the other day they were starting to get a little yellow. So I did give them a little bit of fertilizer so they greened up. But I think it's time that they get moved to a bigger pot. So I'm going to show you how I do that. All right, so potting up is pretty simple. You just want to have some good soil for them to go in. Again, this is going to be a different soil than you use for your seed starting, okay? A couple of tips when you're getting them out of their cells, I like to kind of lay them on their side. And I like to I like these particular seedling trays because the plastic is kind of malleable. It's kind of, so I kind of squeeze it so that it kind of unsticks from the sides, and I can kind of see it starting to come up. Now, there's a couple of tips here. A lot of people will grab the stems and pull them. And if you do that very, very gently, it will probably work. But a tip that I got, one of my favorite gardeners ever, Monty Don, is to hold on to one of those true leaves and gently pull that leaf. Because if you do that, then the leaf pulls off, just the leaf pulls off. You're not pulling the whole entire stem off, okay? So just hold that leaf and gently pull it. And so now I have my plug here, and it's kind of a little bit falling apart, which is not a big deal at all. And what I'm going to do is just take my finger and dig out a little hole for that plug to go in. And then I gently press it in. You don't want to press too hard. If you press too hard, you're going to damage those roots, and you could break off part of the plant, and we just don't want to do that. So I'll just go ahead and finish up this tray while you guys watch. So these are all planted up. I'm going to take them back in, and I'll go put them back under a light. And these guys will just hang out in these 2.5-inch pots until they're ready to plant out in the garden with some of my other veggies to hopefully help keep some bugs away. So that's how to pot up. Again, once you commit to the seeds, there's not just planting involved, right? There's the planting, and then the potting up and the caring for them until they're ready to go out in the garden. So all of that is a big job for the off season. All right, idea number 3 for things to do in the off season when it's cold outside, when you can't be in the garden. This is a fun activity for everyone. It's very easy. It doesn't take a lot of energy or effort. It is sprouting seeds. Sprouting is a really good way to add a lot of nutrient-dense material to things like salads or other meals. I put it on avocado toast, sandwiches, soups, salads, and there's all kinds of seeds to sprout. And you can really go to town on this. It's a pretty simple process. I like, they do have a couple of tools and materials that will make it easier, but you could certainly do this a lot of different ways. So I have the sprouting jar with a kind of a mesh metal lid. If you already have jars, you don't need to go out and buy a special jar. You can just buy the mesh lid. And they make these, I've seen them sold at like Ace and other places. So these are kind of like widely available. And then you just use the same ring as like a canning lid. They also make some other types of lids that are plastic and have some different mesh holes to them, but I like these. I think it works for everything that I sprout, and so it's really easy. And then the other thing I have is like a little tray and a little stand for my jar to hold it at that kind of like 45-degree angle so they can drain out extra water. But I know people who don't have this, who just use like a dish drying rack. And they just put their jar on the dish drying rack and hold it like that, and it drains there. So you don't have to have this particular setup to be able to do this, okay? And so basically what I do, my tablespoon, and there's a lot of different kinds of seeds. You can start lots of legume seeds and lentils and peas and chickpeas. There's all kinds. This one I'm using now is a 5-part salad mix from Handy Pantry. And then I also add a little extra broccoli sprouts because I love my broccoli sprouts. So I kind of add extra. This is what I'm doing now. I've changed it up over the last several months that I've been doing this. I actually got a mixed bag of things from the Handy Pantry, mixed box of different sprouting seeds. So it's kind of fun to get into. And they all have different kind of flavors and tastes and things like that. So mostly what I do is a little bit will go a long way. In this size jar, I'll do about 2 tablespoons of the mixed salad, mix or whatever they call it. And then I'll do 1 extra heaping tablespoon of broccoli sprouts. Now,
If you find that while you're doing this, you're producing too many sprouts for you to keep up with, you can always just not start as many. You know, do 2 tablespoons instead of 3. The first thing you'll want to do is just soak your seeds. So you want to use filtered water if you can. When I put the water in there, I kind of swirl it to try to get all the seeds kind of, in the water. And then I just go like this around the edge. So I'm getting any seeds that are stuck to the wall. So they'll go in the water and soak. And I might pour a little bit more in there. It doesn't really matter how much you pour in there. I just like to have lots extra, okay? And then I basically just let it sit for 8 hours or overnight. You know, sometimes I've gotten busy and it's probably soaked for more like 24. That seems to be fine. So once I soak it, then I will come back and I will drain it, rinse it with the filtered water. And then once it's rinsed again, I will drain it again and put it upside down on my little stand. So I'll show you what that looks like. Let's say I've drained it and I've rinsed it again. And then what I like to do is I like to kind of rotate the jar around. So now I'm getting the seeds to stick to the sides of the jar. And I like that because I feel like it gives them space, it gives them room to breathe, and it gives them, some air. And so then I will just pop it on my little stand here. And it is now at a 45-degree angle, and that extra water is draining down into the tray. And then you just want to rinse it and drain it and put it back on the tray. Try it twice a day is probably best. You could do it 3 times a day, it wouldn't hurt. And then as they start to sprout and they start to grow, I like to put them near some sort of light so they can start greening up. Now, that might be a window. Window works fine. I have a little station here in my kitchen where I grow some lettuce on the countertop. So I just put my jar right next to that, and it gets enough light that when it starts sprouting, the sprouts turn green. That's when I harvest them. And so I'll take them out of the jar. I'll give them one more rinse, and then I'll lay out like a dish towel, tea towel, something like that. I'll empty the jar on that and kind of spread them out and let them air dry for a couple hours or so. And then I put them in these bags. They're like fruit and vegetable bags. I don't like to use a lot of plastic, but this is one plastic item that I really do think works really well. It keeps produce fresher longer, and so I use these for a lot of my produce. But what's cool about it is I wash them and reuse them. And so here is a bag of sprouts that I have just in my fridge, and I will show you what they look like. This is from a couple days, harvested a couple days ago. You can see this is just those 3 tablespoons. Like, it's crazy how much that makes. And so I just throw this on everything I'm eating, and it's just a little added nutrient boost, and they taste good. So I highly recommend starting some sprouts and getting those going in your kitchen when you have some extra time on your hands. And kids can do this. It's really easy. It's a really fun project.
So until it is nice enough to get out in the garden, those are 3 things you can do in the off season to keep you busy and get ready for this year's growing season. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel, and go on over to Instagram and follow me at Homestead Side Hustle.